Welcome to Tony Martignetti Nonprofit Radio, coverage of the National Conference on Philanthropic Planning, coming to you from San Antonio, Texas. We are not in San Francisco. We're on the Riverwalk in San Antonio. My guest now is Ramsey Slugg. He is Senior Vice President and Wealth Strategist with U.S. Trust and in the Bank of America Private Wealth Management from Fort Worth, Texas. His seminar topic is engaging high net worth families in their charitable giving, and he's here to talk to us about the most recent and some of the other surveys on high net worth giving in the U.S. Ramsey, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Pleasure to have you. Why don't we just give a history of the survey that we're here to talk about that's most recently from late last year?
Okay. Well, the one that I'm going to actually present tomorrow came out in late 2010, but it has its genesis back in 2005 when we decided to do a funded research project. We interviewed a lot of the universities around the country that have courses of philanthropic study. We ended up with Indiana University Center on Philanthropy. They're well known, probably the best known of the quantitative study institutions in the area of philanthropy. They do Giving USA is probably their best known study, which really looks at philanthropic giving across the board.
Yeah.
But they said there'd not really been a truly scientific study of charitable giving behaviors and motivations of high net worth people. So they were interested in doing that. That dovetailed very nicely with who our market is. So we've done that, and we've now been out in the field. We went out in 2006 and studied 2005 behavior, and then 2008 studied 2007 behavior, and 2010 studied 2009 behavior, and I'm hoping that next year in 2012 we'll come back out and look at 2011 behavior. So every other year we now have a baseline. Kind of the interesting thing is I think we've now seen a full economic cycle. If you think about when we had 2005 where the economy was, 2007 where the economy was. We came out of the field right before Lehman Brothers went down, and now we have seen 2009. We've seen the depth of the recession. We know what a recession does to charitable giving. It goes down. We didn't have to have a big expensive study to know that, but we have that now scientifically going through an entire economic cycle. And hopefully 2011 will look nicer than 2009.
We're all hopeful, yes.
Yeah.
How does the study define high net worth?
Well, if you had 50 people in a room and you asked them what high net worth meant, you might get 50 different answers.
Probably, yeah.
The challenge here is that the higher that you go, the lower your response rate. So we had to kind of balance things, because if we went into the field with too high of a net worth requirement and we didn't get enough answers back, the problem is then we've got nothing.
Your results are statistically insignificant, and we can't draw any conclusions.
Right.
Yeah.
So we needed to kind of balance that, and so what we went with was $1 million net worth, exclusive of residence, and or $200,000 of income. Now, I wouldn't call that high net worth, personally. Mm-hmm. If I were defining high net worth, I would go higher than that. The mid 50 in this, which means 25% of the answers are below, 25% or above, that mid 50 range is roughly 3 million to 20 million, and the average is about 10.5 to 11 million. And those things would fit my definition of high net worth.
Okay.
So it truly is a high net worth study, even though we've got a lot of millionaire next door type people in it. When you look at the averages, it's above 10 million. So we're in pretty good shape on that.
So let's talk about some of the motivations to give that you find. What's revealing there?
I think what's interesting, and it shifted a little bit over the course of the three studies. Early on, I think something that was surprising to people, and of course we have self-reporting, but what we found is what people were reporting as their motivations for giving were very much altruistic reasons. That people that have more ought to give more, a sense of giving back, setting an example for their children or for others. Mm-hmm. Those types of altruistic reasons, rather than, well, I'm getting football tickets, or I get to go to the gala, or it's good for my business, sort of those egocentric reasons weren't really showing up in the answers.
And where do tax motivations show up?
We asked them separate questions, very, very low. Typically, I think what you can safely draw from the questions is that charitable giving is not as tax motivated as most people think it is. And as a tax lawyer, I tell people that for most people to give money to charity, it leads to no better of a tax result than losing money in the stock market. And nobody does that on purpose. So you don't make money by giving it away. You can be more tax efficient in your charitable giving depending on how you do it, but you're not going to make money. So it's pretty low on the radar.
That's interesting because there's a lot of debate now as we are facing our budget reduction committee, the bipartisan committee, the Obama proposal to cap charitable deductions for those who earn over $200,000 or $250,000 at 28%, and there are other proposals. I think that's the one that gets the most press, but these are all by people in opposition to them, claimed as a death knell to the, depending on who you talk to about how dramatic they want to be, a death knell to charitable giving by the wealthy. But the motivation that come out of the survey is that taxes fall lower in their making their decisions.
Personally, and this goes against sort of conventional wisdom from the industry, I don't think it's going to affect charitable giving very much at all if it passes. And even before you get to that, I don't think it's going to pass. I think it's a lot of talk, but I don't think it's going to happen. And I don't think it's going to affect charitable giving, even if it does happen. I think people give because of mission. They don't give to get a tax break.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we may see how that plays out. Yeah. But again, and you did say this as an aside, the survey is self-reported. So people might be giving the answer that they would like to believe to be true, or that they would like society to believe to be true of them, even though it's all anonymous. We don't know that either.
Right. Well, and I tell people that when I present the survey, it is self-reporting, and typically, if you don't believe that somebody tells a better story about themselves than what reality is, or worse, just ask them about their kids, because their kids all can walk at 9 months and read an encyclopedia at 12 months, and we know that's
they're all true. All children are above average.
Absolutely, and all drivers are too.
That's right.
So it's kind of interesting, but the alternative really is just to rely on IRS data, and the problem with IRS data is most people don't itemize deductions, and if they don't itemize deductions, there is no data. Okay, because there's no other place that it shows up. Or you can go to the charities and ask them, and a lot of that's self-reporting. So there's no perfect way.
And that's interesting about people who don't itemize, and they typically are lower earners, and they're not giving for the charitable deduction purpose because they're not itemizing. They can't claim the deduction.
They don't get one.
Right. All right. We'll see. What else? Any other conclusions about motivations for giving that were interesting to you over time, maybe?
I think what we've seen over time, certainly in the most recent study, people tended to be a little more economically sensitive, but that only makes sense. The economy was tightening up, and so people tended to, some of the answers you could ask about financial security and how does that affect you. And there seemed to be a heightened sensitivity to that in 2009 as opposed to 2007, 2005, but that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. How about what people are giving to? How are we seeing? What results did you see most recently first?
Well, the interesting thing there is a big difference between the general population and the high net worth population.
Okay.
And it's simply the general population. If you go to Giving USA,
I was going to say, now you're comparing Giving USA and the high net worth study.
Right. And we do some direct comparison that in the presentation tomorrow that I'll give tomorrow morning. For the general population, number one is religion by far. Okay. And then it's followed by basic needs and by I think what we call combination giving, which would be to something like United Way or an Arts Council that's not an operating charity, but it's sort of a clearinghouse that hands out to other charities.
And is religion in the 30s in terms of percentage of total giving? Is it roughly 30-something goes to religion?
35% of total giving goes to religion. Okay. But the general population, it is way up there.
Yeah.
The general population, we kind of figure, runs out of money at that point, okay? Because then categories 4 through 10 drop way, way off. High net worth, Number one is giving to what we define as their own charitable vehicles, meaning their own foundation, their own donor advised fund, their own charitable trust. That is far and away number one. Then number two is education. And then number three is religion. Now, that doesn't mean they're less religious. They give more money to religion than the general population. It's just that they give so much money to other categories that the percentage seems to be very low. But and we try to track best we can aggregate giving. So we want people not just to count money that they give to their foundation, because a lot of people have a foundation and they may not be putting any more in right now, but they're doing giving out of their foundation. So we try to capture that too without double counting.
Okay.
So, and again, so I leave that to the statisticians and the experts on how we do that, but we're very sensitive to that. So different giving trends. The other big thing in the high net worth category is they do tend to give to all categories. There are 8 or 9 different categories that Giving USA tracks. And the high net worth group gives to virtually every one of those categories, whereas the population as a whole doesn't. They'll tend to maybe pick 3 or 4.
Well, for the population as a whole, what are the smallest categories down at the bottom?
For the population as a whole, probably the environment and animals, which for some reason they lump together. I have never figured that out, but they do. I have an outdoor cat. That's the only way it makes sense to me. And then the arts. Arts are very small for the general population. And the arts is very volatile. It's driven really by high net worth, and it's driven by capital campaigns. So if somebody's building a museum this year, or there's 5 or 6 museums getting built, then arts is going to be way up. And if nobody's building a museum, boom, it's way down. So there's a big difference there.
Okay. What other categories of the study is there? Besides the donor, we talked about donor motivations, where the dollars are going.
Right. We're broken down into about 6 categories. I don't know if I remember them all off the top of my head.
Oh, that's all right. Well, let's just talk about another one besides the 2 we've talked about.
Well, we start off with demographics,
Okay.
which is just pure statistical information, just dollars, how much is being given by whom, so on and so forth. We look at there are 2 or 3 sections that are really focused in on the numbers, which appeal a lot to me. I don't know why. I'm not a mathematician.
The numbers around
just
what?
Numbers, just giving, who's giving, net worth, so on and so forth.
Okay.
There's a lot of correlation between, and this again makes sense. The higher the income, the more they give. The higher the net worth, the more they give. It's pretty much, if you looked at it on a chart, it's pretty much a perfect exponential curve. Not too surprising there. We look at the tax motivations. Then we focused in a lot on transmitting values. We ask people, how did your children learn about charitable giving?
And what did you see there?
And well, it's interesting because in the second study, we asked a question a little bit different than we asked it in the third study. And in the second study, we asked specifically about how do your children learn. The third study, we asked how do your children and other young relatives, so it could be nieces and nephews included, so it kind of broadens it. When we focus just on children, okay, and again, self-reporting, so the parents, by far number 1 on the list, okay, drops some a little bit when we broaden the question. Clergy's very high. And nonprofit organizations were very high. Although it seemed like sort of the professionals like lawyers and accountants started to take a little more active role as we broaden the question, but it's still family focused.
Okay, and related to that, do we know who in the family is participating in the giving decisions? Whether it's a spouse participating or children are involved?
We asked some other questions there along those lines too.
Okay, let's talk about those.
And so you don't know who's filling out the questionnaire. That gets to be a little bit challenging. And we're examining household giving. So we asked, do you and your spouse or partner or whomever, do you talk about this? Do you make the decisions yourself, or do you talk about it? If you talk about it, do you then do what you want to do anyway, or do you make joint decisions? And we asked some different questions.
Okay. So what'd you find there?
And I think it was pretty broad. I think, and since that was the first time we really asked that question, there's not any really trend information.
Okay.
I think by and large most people talk about it, but there's still kind of primary decision makers within the home. There wasn't any earth-shattering finding.
No. Okay.
You know.
And nothing in terms of children being involved. Do you remember, did children have much of a role in many of the decisions?
Again, it depends. What I think is interesting is that where children are involved, the amount that was given by that household was much, much greater than when children weren't involved. Now, there's no causation there necessarily, but there's correlation. So I can't tell you that they gave more money because the children were involved, or it could have been they had more money to give, so they involved the children.
Because they have children.
So I don't know. It's the old chicken and egg thing.
Okay. Well, you said you don't know, but you're a thought leader on the survey. Anything you want to surmise about why that might be? What's your own opinion? Not the bank's opinion. What do you think might be going on there?
What's going on there?
Yeah, what do you think?
I think it's probably a function of having more money, of having more of a almost institutional approach. So maybe they've got a private foundation in place. Maybe the kids, who we're talking about people not in their teens, we're talking about people in their 30s and 40s. So maybe they've taken a place on the board of the foundation. So, and the family is actually using that foundation as a means to educate the next generation. I think that's probably what's going on there.
Okay. And looking to the future, you said that hopefully in 2012 we'll be looking at 2011 behavior. Is that right?
Hope so.
Okay. Do you see any differences in methodology going forward?
No, what we have done, and clearly if we do this, we would use Indiana again. We would use the same methodology. I would say the majority of the questions will be the same, and they need to be the same because if you even change one word, all of a sudden, scientifically, statistically, you're not asking the same question, so you don't have comparative data. And what I like is the comparative data. But we may want to explore something new. So we explored this whole thing about family dynamics. We've explored using a foundation to do your giving. So we'll ask some different questions as well. And hopefully, I don't know, the economic cycle was certainly in 2011 is better than 2009, but who knows where it's going to be in the future.
Yeah.
So
we have to leave it there. My guest has been Ramsay Slugg, Senior Vice President and Wealth Strategist for U.S. Trust, Bank of America Private Wealth Management in Fort Worth, Texas. We're talking about engaging high net worth families in their charitable giving and discussing the high net worth survey. Ramsay, thank you very much for being a guest.
Thank you, Tony.
It's been a privilege. This is Tony Martignetti, Nonprofit Radio, coverage of the National Conference on Philanthropic Planning in San Antonio, 2011.